Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To both of you and the Army family, I think all of us heartbroken, Fort Hood going through this thing twice, just so the whole nation is thinking about the Army today, and particularly those at Fort Hood. But as we move forward dealing with this problem, General O, do you think the 1992 DOD regulation prohibiting personal possession of firearms on installations should be revisited? What's your view about one way to deal with attacks like this is to have installations where people are armed and can fight back? What's your view of that?
I believe that that we have our military police and others that are armed, and I believe that's appropriate. And I think that I believe that that allows us the level of protection necessary. Although we carry arms quite regularly overseas when we're deployed and do it on a regular basis, I believe back here in the United States it's more appropriate that we leave it to that, sir.
Well, I would just ask you to keep an open mind, because in a deployed environment, everyone has a weapon. It's a pretty stressful place in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I think people have been responsible in the military. And as I remember my last visit to the Afghanistan, that you could not be served chow unless you presented your weapon. And I think the reason is you want everyone to have their weapon because of the insider threat. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
I think our military at home is very much a target of terrorism, but also this seems to be more of a individual who had a hard time coping. But Major Hassan is clearly, to me, was an act of terrorism. I think you can expect more of this back here at home. I just talked to Attorney General Holder, and he said homegrown terrorism, and I'm not saying this was, it apparently wasn't, is getting to be a bigger threat. We've had several soldiers killed. I think one at a recruiting, outside of New Jersey. I just hope you'd revisit this policy, because I think our military members are very responsible with firearms, and we need to really look at having more capability, not less, to deal with insider threats. Now, as to the size of the Army, I know we have a $17 trillion budget deficit, and Admiral Mullen said something that got a lot of attention. The biggest threat to our national security is our deficit. There's some truth to that, but I'm not so much worried about our deficit blowing up the country as I am terrorist. I don't think people in South Carolina are as safe as they could be given sequestration. And you have said very eloquently, General Lowe, that I began my career in a hollow army. I do not want to end my career in a hollow army. If sequestration is allowed to continue beginning in 2016, will we have ended that career in a hollow army?
For the next, from today through 2020 or so, till we get rebalanced based on taking the end strength to a low level, our ability to sustain a level of readiness and modernization, I believe, begins to hollow the Army out. So
the answer would be yes. Thank you for your honesty. And I think you're right. I think every service chief has told us that, and I hope we will act responsibly. Now, if within reason, knowing that money is always an object, would you agree that our military is being positioned based on budget concerns more than threat concerns, given sequestration?
It's clear to me we developed Defense Strategic Guidance, which was before sequestration, and sequestration does not allow us to meet that Defense Strategic Guidance. So we're driving down our structure based on budget.
Yeah, the world's just not safer. That's not why we're cutting the budget. We just decided for some reason to cut the budget in spite of the growing risk. Within reason, what would be the appropriate size of the Army? And if you can't give me an answer today, think about it. Given all the threats that are reasonable that we're facing, and see if we can build a budget to support the Army based on the threats of the nation. Do you have any ballpark figure?
I do. So I'm on record, and I'll repeat what I've said in the past. I believe in order to meet, I testified last year and the year before that in order to, at moderate risk, which I think is reasonable,
well, let's say
a force of 490, 350, and 202 and the reserve component is appropriate for that.
Well, let's say that we didn't want to accept, we wanted to accept some risk, but less than moderate. What would you do?
So then I would say, I believe the floor is 450,000, 335,000 in the Guard.
No, I want to go the other way.
95,000.
I want to have a budget that gives us minimum risk.
I see.
Call me old-fashioned, but
Yeah,
I think that's the
have
number one
I've
job of the
I've
federal
not thought
government.
my way through that, but for many years, most of us believe that the right size of the Army is somewhere around 500 to 520,000.
Okay. That would be the optimum Army, given what we face as a nation.
Right.
Okay. Could you tell me the difference in terms of cost, not today, but over time, you don't have to do it today, between high risk, moderate risk, and the optimum Army?
We can lay that out for you.
And what I want the committee to look at is, in terms of our budget deficit, how much, if we went to the high risk, could we remotely balance the budget? I think the amount of money involved is going to be within our power to gather if we could replace sequestration. Now, about the A-10. The A-10 is being retired because you got to make hard choices budget-wise. Is that correct?
That's what I believe. I mean,
Okay.
that's what I believe the Air Force is.
The F-35 comes online if everything goes perfectly in 2021, I believe. Is that correct?
Around that time. So.
Okay. So for $3.5 billion, we could keep the A-10 in the inventory for a few more years and wouldn't have a gap. Does that make sense?
I would just say it would allow us to keep the A-10 for that amount of money. With that additional money, it would allow the Air Force to make
Okay.
a decision to keep the A-10, but that would be obviously up to them.
Okay. Do both of you still believe that military commanders should bear the responsibility for dealing with sexual harassment problems in the military?
Absolutely, Senator.
Absolutely.
John, do you think we're on the right track of getting a handle on this problem?
I think as we look at the kinds of indicators that we normally use to track these, reports particularly have grown significantly. We view that as positive. As an internal to that, a good number of those reports are for years where something happened before the soldier, usually a female, but not always, the soldier even joined the military. That shows us they have increasing confidence. We obviously have a long ways to go. None of us are ready to declare victory, but we are doing, the chief and I focus on this every day. We've had a meeting just last week, a rally in the Pentagon to kick off Sexual Awareness Month, the month of April. And everything we do and say, including our published priorities, sexual assault and harassment is my #1 priority, and I know that everyone in the Army believes that and is working on it.
Well, thank you. My time's up, but in 10 seconds, General O, could you tell us what happens if we get Afghanistan wrong, if it falls apart? What's going to come our way?
Well, as I said, I mentioned earlier, is our what tells us ungoverned territory or instability will allow those to exploit that, elements such as Al-Qaeda and others, which would then allow portions of Afghanistan and any other area that's ungoverned and not properly secured to threaten the United States, and that remains a concern.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Graham.